Welcome to Privacy and Vaccination Data Session. My name is Mahdi. I'm the CEO and founder of siberX. Now, I'm going to start off right off the bat and preface with the date. Today is Friday, July the 16th, 2021. And the reason why I'm going to say this is some of you may be watching right now, and this is live. The information is changing all the time. And for those, as we do put this on our on-demand section, that may hear this session a year from now, 2 years from now, or 5 years from now, may come back and look at this and this conversation and how it develops. We have a jam-packed session. We have three very powerful panelists. And without much further ado, I want to jump right into this as we only have 59 minutes to cover today. But right off the bat, we're going to jump in with Asif. Asif, if you can do a quick introduction on CanaTrace. I would love to hear on why you started this organization and what you have been doing over the last year.
Thanks, Mahdi, yeah, happy to be here. First of all, thank you for the invitation to be part of this great panel discussion. So I run a company called GroundLevel Insights. We're a data analytics and AI company, and when I started the company a few years ago, we always, in our mission statement, have this sort of view of find ways to give back, help out, support other businesses in our community around us, on top of what we do, commercially for a living. And so, CanaTrace is a product, a platform that we launched back in November last year to really help businesses with the requirements put on them by their provincial authorities or local health authorities to collect contact tracing and screening data. Both at the guest level as well as employee screening. We just saw so many businesses doing it on pen and paper, clipboards at the door, people's personal information just sitting out in the open for anybody to take a photo of or what have you. And so we felt this is an area where we could lend a hand with our expertise, and we built a platform, and it's something that almost 8,000 businesses across the country and virtually every province and territory are now using. So
very cool. And I'm going to share a little quick story. So I went to the barbershop the other day, and there was a piece of paper there. And on that piece of paper, it had your information and the basic questions that are asked. And one of the things I noticed is that the questions were outdated. And I said to the owner, I said, "Did you know your questions are?" He's like, "I don't know." And then I said, "Hey, by the way, what do you do with this, binder that you have sitting here?" He goes, "I don't know." And I was a little bit concerned. And then on top of that, what was funny is I looked at the names and I saw one of my friends had come in and got a haircut a couple of days ago. And that's data that's out there. So how are you protecting that data with CanaTrace?
Yeah, so our system is a QR code based system. We create a custom QR code for every business that signs up. It's branded with their logo and their branding. So when you scan the QR code as a consumer or an employee, it's all coming up with the branding of that business. And then it takes them through the required questions. And to your point, we're updating the questions literally every other day right now. The province of Ontario updated it twice, the screening questions last week. So that's a challenge to keep on top of. And so we're constantly building that piece. On the data side, everything's encrypted. So the QR code URLs, the landing pages, those are encrypted. The data is encrypted in transit. And there's kind of two requirements around the data itself. So one is the data is required to be kept by the business owner for 30 days. So we're sort of holding that for 30 days and then deleting it accordingly and wiping it out of the systems every 30 days. And two is it can't be used for anything other than public health follow-up. So only really the public health local agency or the Ministry of Labor, in the case of employee screening, has access to that data. So it's kind of held quite tightly from that perspective. So the business owner does have to be able to have access to that as well, because often inspectors are showing up on site, health inspectors or Ministry of Labor inspectors requiring to see that binder or that 30-day log.
Interesting. We're also joined by Jasmine, and I'm gonna take this over to you from and get a legal perspective of this. Using that same barbershop as an example, with that information sitting there, readily and easily accessible to anyone and everyone. There's a story I heard a few months ago, and I shared it with Asif, and that was there was a salon that had similar information, and there was someone who went through the information to find a specific, find a girl's phone number and gave her a call. From a legal perspective, what are your top areas of concern with the way that currently, when it comes to screening, how that data is collected?
The greatest issue that I foresee is with respect to an individual's privacy. So right now, well, it's not just right now, it's been about, I don't know, just over a year that we've been in this pandemic. And people have been giving their private information. Even when you go to a restaurant, you have to fill in whatever questionnaire. The barbershop example you described. And a lot of the small businesses, they can't all afford the costs associated with some of the high tech involved. Now, maybe our friend Asif has a cheaper alternative, I don't know. But I know that for a lot of small businesses that I know, in fact, even my own, the evolution of what is required of the small businesses is so rapid, and it's very hard to keep track with the changes and keep up with the pace of those changes, and then keep throwing money into these changes when revenues are down. And so a lot of businesses are doing things like a book in the front of the store or a piece of paper that everyone just fills out and it gets passed around. And yeah, the greatest concern is with respect to an individual's privacy. So what is happening with that information? Where is it going? Who can see this information? And if someone obtains that information, what are they going to do with this information? What the big concern is here is that if someone uses information obtained from that barber shop's book and they use it in a way that is inappropriate, the barbershop owner could be liable. And we don't know what a court of law would say at this point, whether they will say, oh, well, but it's COVID times and this was necessary and it was not foreseeable that this would have happened. Or whether the courts will take a hardline approach and say, no, this incident should not have occurred. There were other avenues that the barber shop owner could have used to protect the safety of their patrons. So it's yet to be determined. The way the law works is they wait for an issue to pass through the court's doors before they can address it and create law for everyone to follow. And so in the interim, everyone is just trying to do their best through the pandemic. And that's all we can really ask for, a common sense approach and trying to do their best.
Interesting. And it feels like everyone's on a boat and everyone's just in the middle of the water trying to navigate through these uncharted, journeys that we're all trying to figure out. And Karen, we talked a couple of times about privacy by design and the principles with when handling data, right? Collecting only information you need, validating any data accuracy, and limiting access to only those who require it and how you encrypt it. From a just using that same example with that binder, are they really following privacy by design?
Well, yes and no. Not if others can access it and see it. So let's just start with no, if folks can access it. Then again, you have to remember that people right now don't know what to do as the customers too. They're walking in and going, here's my vaccination sheet that was printed out that has my, what kind of vaccination I got, what my health card number is. They don't know. They think they need to provide it. We haven't done any education. Or very limited education on what's expected. And as such, I feel that there is a community belief that we have suspended individual privacy to a degree in favor of community privacy. However, going back to your point on privacy design principles, as it applies to COVID and all those practices and this data, we need to build it in. And my favorite, being in cybersecurity, my favorite principle is the full end-to-end piece. Are we bringing both privacy and security together as enablers of each other? While all security is not privacy, security is a driver and enabler of privacy. And both right now in the pandemic, they're business imperatives that need to be considered however you're doing business and wherever you're doing business.
Absolutely. And Asif, if you can comment on how your application benefits the public and what steps you're doing to ensure that there's secure, it's a secure and private environment, and you're keeping privacy by design at the forefront. Can you expand a little bit on how your application does that?
Yeah, so I think from our perspective, we're very clear in the language. When somebody scans a Canada Trace QR code at a restaurant or a business, to begin that contact data collection and screening process, there's a lot of language in there as to sort of why this data is being collected, the sort of the reasoning behind it, the use of it for public health purposes only, and all of that. So there, those kinds of disclosures are there. So in terms of the sort of visibility, transparency aspects of what's going on. The other thing too, like to comment on something Jasmine said about the cost for the businesses, is like our platform's 100% free. Like there's no money involved in it. It's been that way from the beginning. We're doing this as a social good initiative, and it's also fully bilingual, as it's a national platform. So you've got big organizations, federal government properties like the National Gallery, the Art Gallery, using it to small independents, and everybody's got their own different thresholds. But from the consumer point of view, I think it is about transparency. It's about them understanding that the data is not being used or resold or commercialized in any way, and things like that. And that the fact that from a disclosure point of view, that it is public health or Ministry of Labor in the case of employee screening, that has access to that. So we take that stuff very seriously. Starbucks uses our platform nationally, and we went through a 3-week long U.S. Starbucks-led security audit on all of our systems and data and encryption, everything else, in order to get that through. And that's insane for in some respects, for a platform that's free. Like they're not even paying for it, right? And yet, we want to do that because it's important to prove that those kinds of audits are being done, and that people's data is being protected, and that the access is very controlled and limited from that point of view. So it is from from the beginning by design. It is about being proactive about it. It is about that visibility and transparency, and making sure that the data is protected end to end, right? Which are all sort of key principles, right, within that privacy design.
If I
And
may speak to that just for a sec. I love to hear that it's free, Asif.
Yeah.
So that's good. I need to explore that a little. It's interesting because although your product is in many ways safer and more secure than the barbershop's binder or the paper that gets passed around, I think that a lot of people out there believe to be true, because they don't know where the data is going in your program. Although I believe yours is probably much safer than the binder situation where anyone can just see. But I think that when you have a hard paper and it's just sitting here versus something out there in space, internet space, I think people have that fear, that concern. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll answer it two ways. I think that two things that we've learned in the many months that we've been doing this. One is, with those paper-based systems, that risk that it's just sitting right there out in the open. Like there was a bar in Toronto, I won't name the bar, going back to the last time we were still open and dining was allowed. And they were using a paper-based system. And a group of young ladies was there after work for drinks. They went home that evening, and kind of like what Mahdi was speaking to. Later that evening, one of those ladies got a phone call from a number she didn't recognize, and the guy that was trying to basically hit on her eventually admitted he'd just gone and taken a photo of that list at the door and had everybody's information and just started calling numbers, right? And so there's that aspect of things, right, in terms of protecting the data. The second thing is what we've also seen is especially in small towns, like we're operating nationally, so smaller, more rural areas, everybody knows everybody. And so you go and you see the names and the numbers on the list and you're like, oh, like Sam and Susie was here last week. And like now, like all that information is just there, right? Because it's just out in the open. And the third thing is what we found is digitally, when it's not out just facing you on a paper list, people tend to be more truthful in the information that they're providing as well. Because it's going somewhere else, right? And it's not out in the open. So people tend to actually not write down a fake name or a fake number, as much as they, will in an online platform.
So, and Karen,
So
and I want to go ahead, Karen, actually, please go ahead.
Because I have a bunch
It's
of
going to get
questions
fun
as well. I'm going to start at the end with you and just say, where is that data going? I know for Canadians, we would want assurance that our data is staying here locally.
Yep.
Is that something that you do, given that you have Starbucks that is obviously has a larger footprint than just Canada? Do you isolate your customers? Like when I think about, I'm curious about how does the QR code get to folks? How do you set, like, I can imagine you like segregate everyone with their own individual codes, but how can you ensure that somebody doesn't resend it to and switch it out? Does it show up and show you the URL you're going to, that you're being redirected to? What are some of the safeguards you've got in play to assure people that, I'm actually writing to CanaTrace. CanaTrace is going to make sure that only the people in my company, like if I'm a Starbucks employee, my stuff is just going to stay there. Or I'm a Starbucks patron, my stuff is just going to stay there and say you were in Starbucks and not say you were in, Second Cup.
Yeah. So to answer those questions, on the first one, all data tied to CanaTrace is held on Canadian soil, on Canadian servers, from a data residency point of view. So there's no issues there, no Patriot Act issues or anything like that. And two is the URLs are all unique to every single location. So every Starbucks store has its own URL that's tied to that store with a store number, et cetera, and that's visible in when you click on the URL or scan the URL, the code that links you to that URL that is bringing you to. It's branded, so it's Starbucks right away. It's coming up with a Starbucks logo. It's showing that store number or that business name in the actual text of what's being displayed in the sort of declaration about why the business is collecting it. All of that.
Interesting. And Asif, you're on the hot seat. I'm going to take you off the hot seat for a few moments.
Thank you.
And what we're going to do is we're going to transform ourselves into a little bit of the 2021 now, where the number one debate that's been coming up is the vaccine passports, right? And this is what the session is really about. And I was doing a little bit of research, and over the time I've realized privacy means different things to everyone. But when it comes to healthcare, you have your physical privacy, you have your informational privacy, you have your decisional privacy, you have your association privacy as well. And the debate really is coming down to a couple of things, right? And number one, the biggest debate is privacy versus public safety. And so now that we're going into the talk about vaccination and vaccination passports, actually is what we're going to be talking about. As this talk emerges, I would love to hear from Jasmine. What are some of the ethical debates that you are beginning to see in the legal perspective? Jasmine.
Well, the initial discussion from an ethical perspective, I believe, started when the media was questioning Prime Minister Trudeau about what his belief was and whether Canada would have a vaccine passport. And in those early days, that was when Canada did not have any supply or very limited supply, just kind of trickling in slowly. And everyone was very anxious and angry. But Justin Trudeau said we would not have a vaccine passport. I don't know if he's changed his opinion or will change his opinion, but at the time, his opinion was Canada would not have. He was very concerned about equitable issues. Not everyone can be vaccinated. And that's why issue. Not really a few limited people would have this passport if there were a passport. Now we have ramped up supply, thankfully, and There's all sorts of targets in place, and it looks like we're meeting those targets, so that's great. However, there are some people that are choosing not to be vaccinated for their own personal reasons. Some have vaccine hesitancy. Some have religious beliefs about the vaccine. Some have health issues and they can't have the vaccine. So the equitable issue still remains despite the increased supply. Earlier, but it appears even Premier Ford in Ontario is concerned about equitable issues and has stated as of with last 24 hours that he was supporting a vaccine passport in Ontario. Again, this is all about equity and equitable issues facing Canadians and in the province of Ontario. So that's really what the discussion has been about.
Interesting. And I know you're having a little bit of, we're getting a little bit of lag from you, but that's fine. Hopefully that can resolve itself. The vaccine passport. So let's take a step back. The thought process is any public place that you attend, you would then show your vaccine passport to attend that. If you travel, you would show that. If you enter any country, you would show that. And as of right now, it's on paper, right? There's no actual certification process. There's no one way of how this all happens. Now, while governments are trying to figure this out, and while the world is trying to figure this out, as users, right, end users, being myself, Karen, what are some of the health-related data issues that us as end users should be thinking about when it comes to vaccine passports?
First and foremost, what's being collected and going to go into a passport, right? And what's going to be shared? There's different ways and different amounts of information that get shared when we're trying to just send the data that we're using now about our health status. But as soon as you put it onto a vaccine or some sort of card to say, hey, I'm been vaccinated or not, you're setting up inequity. And you're setting up a power imbalance situation where you're going to build in bias potentially into the rollout. From a security perspective, I'd be concerned about interoperability. If our standards here in Canada aren't the same as another countries, how do we arrive at an agreement to say this is the kind of information that we're going to have shared? If it's only okay or not okay, that's one thing, because you've just de-identified the data just to say okay or not without giving any additional information. However, even that is controversial, right? Do we want to share that kind of information?
Yeah, and so speaking to people from, I'm in a unique position. I get to speak to people from all over the world, and the way data is being collected is from country to country or places to places is different, right? I'm John Doe. I show up and I say, hey, here's my piece of paper with my vaccination. I'm doubled up, and now I have to identify myself.
Well,
right?
and that's where I was going to go.
I got to show my driver's license.
You are.
Yeah, I got to show my driver's license. How do you know that driver's license? Where is that going? Where's that information? And then I was speaking to a gentleman who's out in Europe that's creating a facial recognition. So, that has to be set up at the time of vaccination where you just come in, boom, it recognizes you, goes, okay, go ahead. Asif, I wanted to take this over to you. I don't know if CanaTrace is looking at or has done any research on this. From your standpoint, just being a businessman to another businessman, what are your thoughts on the use of vaccine passports, and what is CanaTrace doing about this?
Yeah, so I'm going to agree with everybody's comments about there's the obvious inequities that I think are created with a vaccine passport. What we're doing about it is we're evolving the CanaTrace platform right now. We're getting ready to release a very light app into the marketplace, a CanaTrace app. So right now, CanaTrace is just scan a QR code with your, the camera app, the native camera app on your phone. We're going to release our own app into the marketplace, and all it's really intended to do is give the average Canadian consumer a way to digitally sort of just take an image of their paper certificate, store it in the app, and then what will happen is if you show up at a business that's using CanaTrace and has that QR code in their door or their window, you'll be able to scan it with the app, and the app will natively know which branch to take you down. As in, if you're vaccinated, it'll show your vaccine credentials, your certificate, and if you're not, it'll take you through the normal screening process, whatever is required by the province at that particular time. So it sort of just has that logic in it, and that's kind of where we think, sort of still creates that equity in a sense that if I'm, vaccinated and that's what's, required in that particular scenario, I can proceed accordingly. And if I'm not, I can still enter the premise as long as I do the screening that was always required before.
How do you mitigate against people fraudulently providing their vaccine data? Because I could go take my daughters off the fridge right now and provide it.
Yeah, so basically we have integrations that we're building right now with various health data providers in the provinces to kind of sync up with the the OHIP system and other things to pull that data and verify it. And then just within the app itself that we're building sort of authentication there with Face ID and other things into what we're doing. So we're trying to we don't want to hold anything really that we don't have to hold in there, but we want to provide some basic functionality to streamline the process for a business and its customers, so that at the end of the day, this isn't about data. This is about getting the economy moving again, getting business moving again, and getting people back to work. Right, and to do that in a way that's not really compromising anybody in any way. At the end of the day, nothing's going to be perfect, to answer your question, and there's going to be some fraud in every system.
Yeah, and I mean, and Jasmine, we were talking about this. There's no real clear legal authority for these intended purposes, and from a legal authority. New statutes or an existing statutes or any amendments to these statutes or any public health orders or that clearly specify the legal authority request to require a vaccine passport. If I'm an employee and my employer says, hey, you need to show that you've been vaccinated, or if I'm going into the mall to grab diapers for my baby and I need to show that information from a legal standpoint, what are some of the issues that you're facing when it comes to businesses or people reaching out to you saying, hey, we don't have an answer to this. Can you give us an answer? What are you saying to them?
Well, here's the issue. There is no right answer right now. There's very little guidance. The law has not caught up with what is right, what is wrong, what can we do, what can we not do. So asking lawyers is good because, yes, you definitely want to know the current state of the law. The law is evolving very quickly. There are changes every day. The guidance from the government is changing rapidly. So you definitely want to consult with lawyers, but there is no one size fits all approach. Depending on what sector you're involved in, that is going to differ in terms of the answer. So, for example, if you are working with children versus if you long-term care facility versus if you are working at a sports facility, all of those different facilities or different places are going to have different requirements and are going to have different criteria and are going to have different rules to follow. So there is no one size fits all approach. And I think that from a legal perspective, the lawyer will have to hear what is the specific set of circumstances that I'm being asked about and look at the current guidance and law. But again, understanding that it's evolving. It's evolving every day because we are learning more and more about the vaccine, more and more about COVID, more and more about what's happening with the variants in the world. And so we're trying to catch up and keep pace with that. And as I said earlier, with the law, the way the law works, you wait for something to happen and then the law addresses it. We have legislation that is created, so that gives us some guidance to follow. But the guidance in terms of legislation is for one circumstance, but any variation requires you to go to the courts or to a tribunal and to understand for that particular fact pattern, that court or that tribunal has to look at the set of circumstances, and that's how new law is created. And that's what will give more guidance to the different areas and the different sectors on how to address that particular situation. I don't know if I completely answered your question, but to sum it up, there's no right answer.
Can I add to that?
Please,
Because you're
please,
making me think, Jasmine, of my last passport that I had for traveling, where I have a bunch of vaccination stickers in there that I needed at the time to go to various different countries. So while we don't have precedent for an actual vaccination passport, countries have required it before, so it's not unheard of. However, should we ever have one? You know, I worked many years ago on the MBUN. I don't know if you guys know what that is, the meaningful but useless number that they were trying to create so that all of us could have a digital identity here in Canada. And it just, since you haven't heard about it, you can probably see where that landed. And that was like 15 years ago. I don't think we're that much further, but where we are is in the sanctity, or at least the controls that we've put around our current passports. And I got to wonder, and I'm just throwing this question out for the discussion, why aren't we leveraging our existing passports as a centralized trust and identity system that's validating we are who we say we are in our home countries, and then build standards beyond that? I'm going to throw up as well, one of the issues that I probably could find is how do we ensure that the data that we have is correct currently in the vaccination system? But we are sure that I was Karen, and it was Karen Nemani who got her last shot, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And Karen, you mentioned that there's another, if the viewers want to go to ID 2020, sort of held by the Bill Gates Foundation, where it is to really create digital ID for those that don't have access to ID, and especially in third world countries, and the ability to track or track their privacy protection, et cetera. I want to change the conversation. I know we're about 27 minutes away, and I want to get into, I mean, this is a cybersecurity event, and I do want to sort of push this conversation to cybersecurity and some of the fears that I come across with people that I know. And one of the biggest, there's two actually, but the first one is when the vaccine passport does come about, the fear is active tracking or logging of individuals' activities through a vaccine passport. I enter Canada, I go to the Starbucks, I then go to the keg, I then watch a basketball game, I then check into the hotel. That's a lot of data. There's a lot of digital dust that's sitting around for anyone to sort of take advantage of. And then the question comes, is this vaccine passport going to be by developers? Is it going to be by the government? Is it going to be by third party? Is it going to be a central database? Or is this going to be across jurisdictions? Where will and who will hold this information? So as we know, Karen, everything is hackable. What are your concerns that once and if the vaccine passport is implemented from a cybersecurity standpoint, as we know right now, especially since COVID, hackers have been running rampant. And this sort of information is extremely valuable. What are your concerns you're seeing in the cybersecurity world regarding vaccine passports and the limiting collection, use, and disclosure of this information?
Much of it's what we spoke about before. We don't have interoperable global standards for how this needs to happen. It could be subject to identity theft and fraud. And there's an argument these days to focus on a decentralized model, because if you don't have all the information in one place, it's not like a honeypot for attackers to focus on, right? It also allows different systems to have to collude to be able to track, right? So this way you can separate up who's tracking, who's got the information. And if needed, then you could start putting it together, and it would be under specific conditions. Identity management. as I said before, is also a big issue, as well as, all of the who gets to see that data on the back end? Where is it going? Where is it stored? Who are they sharing it with? And just what is being collected that I don't necessarily know. And that's a feature that you might have with apps, right? As soon as we put technology into the mix, you want to know that they're secure and.
Got it. And Jasmine, I'm going to take this over to you with regards to transparency. Part of privacy is transparency, and that myself as a Canadian, I should be informed about the purpose and scope of the vaccine passport, the collection, the use, the disclosure, the retention, the disposal of that personal information for the purpose of vaccine passports. From a legal perspective, that transparency, where do you think it should fall, and who should be running that, and what are some of the concerns you have around transparency of that information?
I have a lot of concerns about transparency of information and what's going on, because throughout the pandemic, unfortunately, I've seen borderline abuse of power, maybe abuse of power. I don't want to get into a big discussion on that because I think it's very controversial. But I feel that in a lot of situations, the government is saying things are for the greater good. So they're using the argument that on public policy grounds, it is acceptable for them to be doing certain things. Whereas I feel that pre-pandemic, it was very rare for the government to take that approach. And now it seems that it's often invoked, emergency basis, the Emergency Act, things need to happen because this is how we protect the people. And I'm hoping that after the pandemic, that the pendulum will swing back and that those sorts of emergency responses that the government has invoked aren't used as often as we're seeing them being used. But I think that there's a lot of concern because we don't know what's going to happen with this information. And, hopefully it will be safe, but there's stuff like hacking that can occur. But putting aside hacking, in terms of the government, what are they doing? Or in terms of the agency that collects on behalf of the government, what are they doing? So there's going to be a lot of questions and a lot of concerns, and it's a growing process. So a lot has yet to be seen in this regard.
And I'm going to jump into two other items. Karen, we're going to talk about the technical, physical, administrative safeguards and some precedents that you could talk about in a few seconds. But right before I do that, Asif, regarding accountability, policies, agreements, and laws, have to minimize any impact on privacy. And one of the things I want to talk about is the access and correction of any information available through the vaccine passport, right? So I've gotten this, there's an error, there's a complaint, there's an inquiry I have, someone's used my information wrong. What are you seeing with CanaTrace, and what are you seeing with vaccine passports where accountability should be put into place by whoever is putting out these vaccine passports, whether it's government or provincial, federal, or private sector?
I can tell you what we're seeing. So I think, like, in the conversations we've been having on vaccine passports with different players and holders of data, there's right now it's kind of the Wild West. Like, nobody really knows how this is going to play out, or if there's going to be one standard or not. And so there's a little bit of, I have this data, you have that data. Are we combining it? Are we, anonymizing it? Like, what, how is that playing out? And then there's a lot of passing the buck, right? This data came from you, so if it's not accurate, but I'm showing it over here, then you're responsible because you were the collector of the data, right? So at the end of the day, I think it's it tends to default back to that, who's the entity that's collecting the data at source, in terms of its authenticity or, its accuracy. And I want to comment on something else you said earlier. You were talking about this sort of tracking piece, right? Of, I arrive at the airport and then I went here and then I went there. And my core business, like GroundLevel Insights, the company behind CanaTrace, we do that for a living. We don't do it with CanaTrace. We do it with anonymous mobile location data, so mobile IDs. We don't know anything about any name of any person, but we see those patterns, and we're looking at it at broad level. So, if you take, this bar, we can tell you how many people went there today based on mobile phones that were present and counting those phones. And then we can tell you that 12% of those, phones also went to this spa today and went to this gas station today, and so on and so forth. So we're looking for those patterns in what's going on as a commercial offering, but there's no personally identifiable information in that, right? I mean, to what Karen was saying, you'd have to go and team up with, in that decentralized model, like 4 or 5 other different players who have different pieces that can all, and then all agree to link them all together in order to be able to or put that puzzle together, and nobody's really doing that, right? So, so I think there's a lot of challenges there, but.
Yeah, no, and the accountability is another thing, right? When I go on Google and I'm looking for vacuum cleaners and suddenly I get a bunch of advertising for vacuum cleaner, I consented to that. I know what I'm getting into. But if I've done my vaccine passport and I stopped over at the Walmart and now I'm getting advertisement from Walmart, suddenly I'm kind of looking at that going, wait a minute, something's up. And the accountability should be there. And that is the ability for me to, or an individual to inquire or even complain, so that those organizations that are misusing the data are held accountable. Yes. I want to go over into safeguarding. And when it comes to vaccine passport, you have the technical, physical, and administrative safeguards that have to be put into place. Especially with the use of information, because that's being collected, used, and disclosed. Based on past experience, Karen, and examples, what can the community look at from processes that are put into place to regularly test, assess, and evaluate the effectiveness of privacy and security measures adopted? Can you give us some examples of use case scenarios where we all can learn from and take from?
With respect to the vaccine passport, or just with respect to safeguarding personal information, personal health information?
Yeah, it's going to be a crazy conversation. We'll just focus on vaccine passport for now.
Okay. Well, the idea, we were talking a little bit before, just from a technical perspective, what you send and what you get back, and what's being collected to be able to source it. You can de-identify the information so long as I have control over it and I can give permission and consent for it to be accessed. What does that mean from a technical perspective? You've built into your application automatic identifiers, right? De-identification. I think, Asif, you talked about this with your mobile IDs. Same sort of thing. You want to have the information encrypted. You want to have it isolated. You want to ensure that you've secured, if it's a technical piece like an app, you want to ensure that those safeguards, like you've done a pen test, and ensure that it's at least as safe and secure as you can on the back end. From a physical perspective, the way I think of vaccine passports is, if somebody, what do you do? I would hope that vaccine passports, if we were to have them digital, would be locked and only accessible through some sort of multi-factor authentication. I would also expect that there would be some sort of, like we do if it's a physical piece, like our money, like the physical safeguards that we have on our funds, to assure that it is truly a Canadian dollar with those dots and all of those fraudulent safeguards, as well as people who are collecting data, safeguarding it, who has access to it and such. From an administrative perspective, it's all gonna, to me, much of it comes down with assuring that you are who you say you are, and that the information and integrity of the information is correct. So all of those who use it, who access it, who process it, need to be part of that solution.
Right. And now,
can I add one quick comment on that?
Please,
can
Asif.
Quick comment on that, Karen.
Yeah.
I completely agree with 100% everything you just said. But in a reality of the world that we live in, when people are looking at something like COVID, which, we're all hoping is not something that's going to be here, in another year from now,
right?
The monetary investment required to do a lot of these things that you're talking about it's not justified by those companies, right? That are looking to serve them, right? So, our paper money, and the levels of security and encryption on that, took years and years and years and years to develop, but it's worth it because it's something something that persists, right? Over time. And so there's that trade-off, right? And so I think a lot of companies right now are trying to find that happy balance.
Understood.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people,
go ahead.
I'm just going to address continue this conversation for a quick sec. I think a lot of people think that COVID's going to be over. And that we're looking at post-pandemic as return to normal without any other outbreaks or needs for us to do the contact tracing and such. I think post-pandemic life is going to be a hybrid, and we need to figure out that balance between the community interest and the personal privacy when we make these decisions and how we invest our energy and resources and funds going forward. I get that some of these probably sound over the top. That's that balance between, assuring your customers and assuring the public that you are securing and safeguarding their information versus, losing their trust should you get hacked.
And
So
Karen,
I'm
yeah, please, Jasmine.
I was going to say, I'm actually one of the people that doesn't think that COVID's ever going away. I think we need to, it may not be a pandemic, but I think it's just here. And I think we have to learn how to live with it. Sorry, just putting it out there.
Yeah, no, and this is
I hear you.
I think we're all in agreement on that.
Well, we are
Okay.
in agreement, but there is something that I would like to bring up, and that is time and scope limitation, right, Jasmine? And that is, how long should this information be around? You have a pandemic and then you have an epidemic, right? And that is it's not global, it's very, one place. And as we move towards the, people being vaccinated 80%, 90%, how much of that information should be held, and what should be deleted, and what shouldn't be deleted? And so the time and scope limitation is something that is very important. I think that we need to address. And I want to take this over to Jasmine there, and that is, are you familiar with any cases where the data has been used outside of the agreed upon terms, and how scary was that, and what problems did that cause?
I actually am not aware of any. I don't know if there are. I'm just not personally aware. I feel that the media right now is focusing on COVID cases and COVID deaths, and I don't think we get a lot of information about privacy breaches. I just haven't seen any, but maybe Asif or Karen may have some more information on that.
No, but what I
Maybe
do
not.
know is that
Sorry.
more companies are spending more on privacy now than they ever have before, especially because they've changed their footprint. So all of a sudden, security and privacy are at the forefront. So it might.
So I got one that's
Okay.
happening right now, and that is in Canada. To enter Canada, if you take specific vaccines, you're not able to enter Canada, right? Now that is data that is sitting there that anyone can access. Well, not anyone can today access, but potentially someone can access, Karen. And if someone had access to that information, that could be very detrimental to the individual who may probably go and get another vaccine and maybe go and get Pfizer. But now on their record, it shows this person took this and now has taken this. And that information and that storing of that information could be detrimental to someone. Same with AstraZeneca. I was having a conversation with someone yesterday, and they were like, "Oh, I hope you never took the AstraZeneca vaccine." And that's like, well, no, I didn't. But now we have this class system of different types of vaccine.
You're
And that
laying
data,
down my worst fear, where I said one day we're going to have a dystopian society where we have Moderna folks
well,
over
this
here.
is what I
and
want to
Pfizer
touch
folks
on.
here.
Yeah.
And
Well,
Jasmine, please
there's
jump
the
in.
Arrive. Yeah, there's the Arrive Can app too that is causing some concern. So when people fly into Canada right now, you have to complete the Arrive Can app. And as of, when was it, July 5th, I think at 11:59 p.m., I was eyeing that, the law changed. So you don't have to quarantine when you return if you have your double dose vaccination, you're fully vaccinated. Or I guess you could do Johnson and just get your one shot, but fully vaccinated. And so you have to upload to ArriveCan proof Now, it's interesting because the proof, if you get in the US, you have your CDC proof, which is this handwritten card, which anyone I think can forge. But and then here you have the actual, well, in Ontario, the Ministry of Health spits out this receipt and they email you. But even that I think can be doctored and manufactured. And so you upload it on this app and or you screenshot it or whatever. And then supposedly ArriveCan keeps that information for giving you the quarantine exemption. But I have no idea where that information goes, who's looking at it. Did they look at it as people are crossing through the border? How long are they going to keep it? So these are all really good questions. And in terms of what you were saying earlier about the vaccine and which one you got, I mean, yeah, you've got, if someone is another country and you get Sputnik in Russia or Sinovac in China and you want to come here, you can't come. Well, you can't be exempt from quarantine because we don't recognize those vaccines here as approved by Health Canada. But then you're right, it gets into, okay, well, what are they supposed to do? And well, we don't know what the rules are, right? So when the border reopens, I'm sure that there will be new rules created about if you have received other vaccines and if you can enter with those vaccines. So I think that is a to be determined. But I think right now, one thing that we might want to start thinking about is, well, what is ArriveCan doing with like
their data,
their app and this information, and
how,
what is it being
we're sending that stuff and like, how is it uploading?
People that, I mean, I don't, if people, and when I was vaccinated, I don't mind, but there are people that do mind. And I respect that. I mean, everyone has a right to privacy in this country. And I think also it's not just that they can see that you got the vaccine, they see where you got it, when you got it. And I think there's other information attached to it, like your name and your date of birth and maybe other stuff. So I think that those are the concerns. And as I said, some people are more concerned than others, but everyone has a right to privacy. And so it's understandable that some people are concerned about it.
So just very quickly, I know we have about 8 minutes left. I do want to ask one question to Asif, and that is, any lessons learned from the COVID app, which was rolled out to alert people on exposure? Did we learn anything from that? Anything we can take away for the future?
Facetiously, I'll say that the federal government's no better at driving app downloads than your typical retail brand. Yeah, it's a failure.
It hogged data.
Yeah, on a number.
We're gonna be in so much trouble. I'm saying abuse of power. You're saying like they can't create an app.
No, I mean, like, so they built
from the government.
None of the words used
they built this
today, none of the views, expressions are by CyberX. I'm joking.
Oh, geez. So, like, what? 8 million of Canadians downloaded it. 8 to 10 million Canadians downloaded it. You know, with like a 5% active usage rate. I mean, a lot of money, paid to build that thing, and at the end of the day, completely ineffective, right? And increasingly, week by week, people are just uninstalling it, and it's just, I look at that. Sorry, you were going to say something?
I didn't mean to interrupt, but I hate on Zoom how everyone cuts out. But okay, maybe I did mean to interrupt. So it's just like the vaccine hunter situation.
Right.
Like the government couldn't even figure out how we could figure where to get the vaccine. And so even the government officials are saying at their daily press conferences, you should look into vaccine hunters. I'm like, why are we relying on this community-based organization? I mean, they're amazing. I'm so happy that they have stood up and helped us out. But like, where are the government on this?
I mean,
who's accountable for managing? Right.
I completely echo that, Jasmine. I mean, look, we built an entire platform on our own with no support from the government at all, right? And we have thousands of businesses in every part of the country using this thing with no government endorsement or support of it officially, right? They're using it themselves all over the place, in their buildings and their properties and whatnot, because they don't they just don't have the internal capability and expertise on how to do this stuff, right? And so they're just kind of relying on private sector to step up and do it.
So we're about 5 minutes away, and no session is a great session unless we can give us a few key takeaways for our audience. Again, on July the 16th, on a Friday, when we really don't know what's happening. I mean, we're hearing news of another potential lockdown. We're hearing news of Delta variant and other variants. And will this vaccine work or will it not work? And do you need a booster shot? It's all over the place right now. One day
What
they're saying,
what other lockdown? You're concerning me. There's no more lockdown. Don't tell me that.
There's
you're
always
right. You're right.
whispers.
I can't
There is no
handle it.
lockdown. But just some key takeaways. So I'll start off with Karen. If you can just bring up one or two key messages you want to say to the audience today to protect themselves.
Wow. To protect themselves. Do your own risk assessment would be number one.
Good.
Do you need to give this information? How much of it do you really need to give? Just give the minimum and ask questions. There's no, it's not wrong to go in and go, why? I don't know if you have ever had the experience of going to a clothing shop and buying something and they say, give me your email address or your phone number. My response is always, what do you need it for?
Yeah.
And it's
Most
often for
powerful.
convenience, right?
The most powerful word in the English dictionary is why. Why do you need it? And one of the things I would like to suggest to people is look at your legislation. Look at what the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario is saying. Look at what the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada is saying. Educate yourself to understand what are your rights when it comes to the use of this data and when it comes to the use of your vaccine passport. Moving over to Jasmine, from a legal perspective, what is some advice that you can give to our users, and you're not going to bill any of them?
Well, the law is evolving. You need to definitely consult with your lawyers as you see fit. Pay attention to the news. Do your research online. Make sure that your online searches are from credible sources. There's a lot of fake news out there. So you want to make sure that you're using credible sources. So do your due diligence. And before you see a lawyer, don't go to the lawyer without having done some preliminary research. Drive up your bill. You want to know exactly what it is you want to know before you get in there. Trying to figure out what you're trying to figure out while you're sitting in front of your lawyer is just going to cost you a lot of money unnecessarily. So go in with a set of questions that you need to ask and that you need answers to. So that's my first piece of advice. My second piece of advice is that, as I said, and I've said a few times today, the law is continuing to change at a rapid pace during this pandemic. And to some degree, breathe and enjoy life and spend time with your friends and family, like as soon as you can and as soon as you feel comfortable, because the law is going to continue to change and you need to embrace all the good times that we've missed out on for the last year. That's my advice.
Awesome. And I know we missed a little bit of what you were saying, but it is valuable. I'm sure on our on-demand, we'll clear up some of the data issues there. And we have 2 minutes left. And Asif, I'm gonna bring this back to you to bring us to a soft landing here. What are some advices that you can give as you are you're really help keeping safe Canada? So what are some advices that you would give? And also, Asif, how can people reach out to you if anyone's listening here that would like to implement this at their place of business?
Yeah, thanks. So if you're interested in CanaTrace, just go to canatrace.com, CANA all one word.com, and it's a super simple sign up one page form. So that's quite easy. I think for me, I'll close with this. Like I think if you're a business owner in any industry, make sure you have a safety plan, in place for protecting your customers, your guests, your visitors, and your staff and employees. And those two things are actually, quite different. And the screening questions and things like that are slightly different, set by the different public health agencies or labor ministries and so on. So make sure you're doing that work. And second, for the consumers, I think, put your trust in businesses that are really transparent about what they're doing and that are trying and making an effort to do things to improve their atmosphere, whether that's the data side of this, or improving the air quality in their inside of their business, or sanitation, or other things that are about safety and health. That's what I have to say. And then I think the third thing is just to echo Jasmine a little bit, go out and enjoy and spend money again, and let's get our economy moving, right? And I think we all want to see that, and we all want to see some sort of return to where we were, and hopefully growth again for our country and our economy. So
well said, Asif. Well said, Jasmine. Well said, Karen. You guys were. It was an amazing session. I had a feeling it was going to be a back and forth. To the users, if you were looking for concrete answers, we don't got them. No one really has them. We do have a guidance. We have a journey. We're all on that journey. And I think the best answer to this journey is enjoy life. For the last year, we've been tucked away and doing those things that we needed to help protect our neighbors and our family and our loved ones. But go out there, enjoy life, enjoy your time. I know it's a Friday. Thank you to our guests again for attending. For those that are watching, thank you very much. And everyone, have yourself a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.